Thank you, Ryan. Everybody can hear me okay? Good, yeah. You could probably request a palm reader with that helpline, though. Maybe that person can tell you what your future is. But I love that it came up straight away, Futurist predicting the future. I do not own a crystal ball. I just wanted to address the elephant in the room. At no point when I went to school for futurism did they issue me one of these, so I cannot predict the future, unfortunately. But what I can do is help people to prepare for the future. And I love that I get a chance to go on after Dre's talk yesterday, because I think he really primed this audience to understand that. Thinking about the future is about thinking through the possibilities that are in front of us and then making strategic choices about what to do with those possibilities. Right? So I can't tell you what's going to happen in 5 years, but I can help you to develop a range of possibilities and think through the strategic plays that you could enact to meet the challenges of the future. So professionally, as a futurist, I do three things. What I just described, to help organizations create a long-term view of the future using strategic foresight, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is. And just to put in a plug, in the session later today in the workshop, Akil and I, where's Akil? There he is. Hi, Akil. We'll be discussing a method for doing that type of work. So if you're interested to learn a practical skill of strategic foresight or futurism, please attend. I also teach foresight at various schools across North America. And I also have a long-standing passion for working with startups who are trying to commercialize emerging technologies. And so for this talk, I decided I think that's maybe, the most applicable thing to talk about when it comes to user experience design. So I'll tell you some stories about some of the startups I've worked with and the organizations that I've worked with through the years. And at first, when I got the invite, I actually wasn't really sure what I could contribute, because I'm not a CX professional. I don't really touch user experience design directly. But as I thought about it, I did realize that many of the challenges that these startups have working with emerging technologies, they do boil down to UX challenges. And I think that there are unique challenges to working in emerging technology, and we will talk about those. There are also the challenges you have with any product or service. You want it to be beautiful, you want it to be intuitive. But with emerging technology, you also have to overcome the strong emotions, beliefs, and habits that people bring to an emerging technology. Oftentimes, they inspire a sense of fear or unease. People don't know what to think of them. They think, oh my gosh, this new technology is it's a signal of the end of the world. So you have to really combat a lot of those associations. So UX is the most critical factor, I think, in the adoption of emerging technologies. You would be shocked at how early a lot of the technologies that we use in our daily lives were invented. So for instance, the optical mouse was invented, I think, back in the early 80s, and it took decades for it to reach a consumer audience, to be commercialized at scale, because we needed a proper use case. We needed the technology ecosystem to evolve. Some of the technologies I'll talk about today, they're not really new, they were invented a long time ago, but they are emerging in the sense that they are emerging into the broader marketplace. And when I started to think about what holds technologies back, it is that use case. It's the user experience. We haven't found the right use case for some of these technologies. So UX is really important, really, really important for emerging technology. And when I talk about user experience in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to use it in a kind of an expansive sense. So some of it will be, the essential mechanics, the ergonomics and the UI of a product or service. And then the emotional dynamics that, a product or service brings up. So, what is the interaction like? How do we engage with it? What does it feel like? So these are the tactile elements of a product or service. But I think equally important are these sort of broader elements of user experience. So how does, and these are especially important in emerging technology, how does an emerging technology interact with our cultural considerations? How does it challenge our cultural norms, our values, our expectations for what technology could be? And then perhaps even more broadly, I'll be standing in front of this, how does it interact with our moral frameworks? What are the ethical puzzles and existential questions that these technologies inspire in us. So we're going to talk about all these things. And in order to do that, I want to talk about 3 case studies. These are projects I've worked on as a professional futurist through my career. The first is in the space of radical life extension. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a very sort of niche market, let's say. If you're not familiar with it, we'll talk about what that is. The second is in commercializing a neurotechnology product. This is a product I worked on that this woman is wearing here, and we'll talk in detail about that. And the last is an ongoing effort with an organization called Lotic.ai, where I am a resident futurist, and we're trying to take a different sort of path through to finding value with artificial intelligence. So we'll talk about that as well. So we're just going to dive straight into the first case study, and I want to start with a few questions for you. Don't worry, they're easy questions. First question, would you use a product or service that added 10 healthy years to your lifespan? If you would, please raise your hand. Okay. Oh, keep your hands up if you don't mind. Now, who would use a product or service that added 100 healthy years to your lifespan? If you would, keep your hand raised. If you wouldn't, lower your hand. Would you use a product or service that added 1,000 healthy years to your lifespan? And would you use a product or service that added an indefinite number of healthy years to your lifespan? Okay. Great, thank you. Thank you so much for that. So I find the answers to these questions fascinating. I don't know if anybody was looking around the room. The more years that these imaginary products promised, the fewer people were interested, which I think is a really strange and counterintuitive finding, right? Like it's a product that promises more value, but fewer people want it. How does that track? So nearly everyone I saw from up here would use a product that added 10 healthy years to their lifespan, but when you get to 100, 1,000, or an indefinite number of years, it suddenly becomes like a niche product. And when you ask people why they have these preferences, they'll tell you that, well, these products that promise 100, 1,000, an indefinite number of years, there's something unnatural about them. Or they say, well, really only selfish people would want to live that long, and I'm just not a selfish person, you know. And the other one I hear a lot is, well, I'm worried that I'd get bored. I'd get bored with living that long, which I think is very funny. So I think what we can learn from this short series of questions is that, and these are all imaginary products. There's no product on market that does any of these things, right? But as an imaginary product, they exceed the bounds of what is acceptable or normal in our current frame of reference. So they're so far outside the normal rules that we don't really know what to do with these more extraordinary products, okay? So I'll just give you a kind of a segmentation of the life extension market as it exists today. So imagine we have, the average human lifespan in the developed world is around 85 years. Then we have this kind of scale. So roughly speaking, let's say we have incremental life extension or traditional life extension products. And you're no doubt familiar with most of these. I mean, you probably get these on your Instagram feed every day, or at least some of them, right? And some of them are a bit more, let's say, on the edge. So things like hormonal treatment, gene therapy, and cellular rejuvenation. These are products that, are making not sort of these outrageous radical claims, but saying they can help you to extend your healthy lifespan in incremental ways. And then on the other side, where the curve starts to go vertical, we have these types of technologies, which there are markets for some of these, and others are, at this point, I would say, purely in R&D. So you have organ replacement, and by that I mean not organ transplants, but growing organs. We have bioengineering, cryonics, and stasis, which we will talk about in a moment. Nanotechnology, which is this idea that you can dispatch trillions of tiny robots in your bloodstream to fix your body from the inside out. And then finally, mind uploading technology, which again, we will talk about in just a moment. So that's a broad look at the market as it exists today. In traditional life extension, we are making some headway. So there are companies like Calico. This is a subsidiary of Alphabet. And they're working on understanding the genetics of aging with the goal of uncovering insights that could delay aging or counteract age-related diseases. And then Altos Labs, they're backed by a bunch of people, most notably Jeff Bezos. They're working on cellular rejuvenation. So those are technologies that could restore cell health and make cells more resilient. Both of these labs are doing a ton of interesting research, and they are in clinical trials. I think Calico in particular is doing clinical trials with AbbVie on neurodegenerative diseases, applications for neurodegenerative diseases. But neither has published a roadmap for delivering these therapies into the market. Now, there's another really interesting life extension company I want to talk about, and that is Loyal. So I think Loyal is taking the right approach to commercializing life extension technologies. So they develop life extension treatments for dogs. In particular, this first product that they have, Loyal 1, is intended to increase the lifespan of large or giant dog breeds, which for the dog owners in the audience know that tragically don't live as long as smaller breeds, and so are called heartbreak dogs often. And so the intention is that this could close the gap. This treatment could close the gap between the lifespan of large and giant dog breeds and regular-sized dogs. And I think that's brilliant for two reasons. Number one, the path to commercialization for life extension therapies for canines is cheaper and it's more expedient. The strictures that exist in clinical trials for humans do not exist in the same way as they do for canines. So it's quicker and easier. And number two, it really sets the stage for normalization. So if we start to see, these types of therapies are effective in canines, and people say, oh yeah, I got a giant schnauzer. Oh really? That's sad that they don't live so long. Actually, I have this treatment. So it paves the way for normalizing this technology in general. So I think that that's a really important principle when you're working in emerging technologies. And this is like the first lesson I want to impart. Is sometimes you kind of need to go off road mapping, right? So you have your ultimate kind of product vision, and in this case it would be that we want to extend human life, but in order to prepare the ground for that, we need to kind of go off roadmap, and we need to normalize it in a way and make people comfortable with it so that it doesn't feel so strange. This is something that there are good case studies that we can draw on from things that we're familiar with. So Amazon is a good example. Amazon launched with books because Jeff Bezos understood that, first of all, books are easy to pack. They're not abnormal shapes. And there's an enormous and ready supply of them. And the people who buy books have a lot of disposable income. And so the reason that Amazon was a bookseller at first was not because Jeff Bezos was passionate about selling books. He wanted to get people used to this idea of e-commerce, and books was the most expedient way to do that. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about radical life extension. So now again, by show of hands, who in the audience is familiar with cryonics? Anybody heard of cryonics? Okay, a few folks. Okay, so for those who aren't familiar, cryonics is the practice of preserving the deceased at extremely low temperatures, around minus 200 degrees Celsius, to slow cell degradation to a crawl, with the hope that whatever may have caused this individual's death can be cured, fixed, or reversed sometime in the future. Now, what you're seeing here is footage from a facility in Arizona called Alcor, and this is a cryonics facility. They have 1,500 paying members, and they have 250 patients. So members are people who've made financial and legal arrangements to be preserved, and these are called dewars, they're basically thermoses, giant thermoses. And patients are how they describe the people who are currently stored in the facility. You might be interested to know that there are some famous people who are in this facility, including, where's Albert? Is Albert here? The baseball player? Ted Williams, the baseball player Ted Williams. The neuroscientist Marvin Minsky, who passed a few years ago, he's over here at Alcor. And then a computer programmer named Hal Finney, who some of you may know again, but he is the odds-on favorite to be the individual behind the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. What did Satoshi Nakamoto invent? Bitcoin. So the inventor of Bitcoin is in all likelihood in this facility today. And his Bitcoin wallet, which has been inactive since Hal Finney's death, has billions of dollars of Bitcoin in it. So if 300 years from now they figure out a way to bring Hal back, he's going to be very, very rich. But what I want to point out about this is, like, does this look like an inviting place to spend an indefinite future, waiting for your body to be repaired? I really feel like this facility in particular could probably use some user experience design. It's very engineering forward, right? It doesn't really have any sort of sense of warmth or place, and that's just a fact of this very nascent and early technology, right? But again, this is why we need UX. Now, you may be surprised to hear that there is a rival technology to cryonics that also promises long-term human storage, and that is something called brain plastination. So early in my career as a young futurist, I worked with a team of scientists and futurists to establish an innovation prize to basically jumpstart basic research into medical protocols for preserving the integrity of brain tissue after death by using plastic resins. So rather than freezing the brain, you basically turn it into a shelf-stable lump of plastic that has such fine detail that you capture the position of every single cell in the brain in perfect fidelity. Okay, so the natural question I'm sure a lot of you have is, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to turn your brain into a lump of plastic? It seems like a non-reversible practice, right? So there's a trade-off. You can't just thaw plastic out. So I could describe to you why you'd want to do that, but luckily, this work of ours was covered by Morgan Freeman in his television show Through the Wormhole, and since he's a much better narrator than I am, I will let him talk about it. And this gentleman in this video is Ken Hayworth, my former boss, president and CEO of the Brain Preservation Foundation, and he's an electron microscopist from Harvard.
Now, what I'm saying is that neuroscience has told us that we, in essence, are digital information stored in the synaptic connections within our brain. If we preserve that brain at our death, then that information that makes us unique, all of those memories, they're not lost. And they can be potentially brought back just the same way digital information can be brought back by putting it in a new computer.
Software is physically written onto a hard drive. Make an exact copy of a drive and you have an exact copy of the information it contains. Ken believes all the information in your brain can also be copied and stored. All you have to do to preserve the connectome's trillions of neural connections is to copy the brain's hardware, one slice at a time. Ken's brain scanning assembly line would work like this. At the moment of death, the brain is extracted and preserved in plastic. The brain is then chopped by a heated diamond knife into 20-micron cubes, 40,000 times thinner than a human hair. These tiny slices are sliced again, 1,000 times thinner, then scanned by ion beams. The process is repeated millions of times until the entire brain is digitized.
It is technology that exists today. We map small bits of neural tissue at this ultimate resolution already.
The resolution is so high that we can not only see the connections between neurons, we can also determine their strength and type.
Once we have the ability to map a human brain, and once we have the knowledge of how that generates a human mind, we will be able to simulate that brain in a computer substrate and bring that individual back to life inside of a computer simulation.
So it just occurred to me watching that back. I don't know why they have Ken standing in a model train. I have no idea why. I'm sure there's a good reason. I haven't watched the episode in a while. But I mean, I love that clip for a couple of reasons. First of all, the creepy music, it's great. And it really, that little conveyor belt thing, like that's obviously not what it would look like. But it does give a great end-to-end look at the process of plastination through imaging and uploading. And the work that we did at the Brain Preservation Foundation was really focused on that very first bit of the conveyor belt where Morgan Freeman says the brain is extracted and preserved in plastic. So that's what we're trying to figure out. And we incentivize teams of researchers from around the world to work on a protocol to make that happen to the level where you can when you plastinate tissue, brain tissue, that you could keep all of this structure in its, in exactly the same configuration that it was at the moment of death. And so this scale you're looking at, these are neuron bodies. These guys here, these are organelles inside the neurons. So this scale, 100 nanometers, is 1/100,000th of the width of a human hair. So that's the level of fidelity we're talking about. And the other thing that Ken says here is this technology exists. It's just a matter of scaling it, right? So, okay. But I understand that these two options that these technologies present to us, you want to be frozen or you want to be turned into plastic and chopped into a million little pieces, neither one of those sounds very good from the vantage point of today. So when we were working on this, we were very, very cognizant of that. And we were looking at trying to scan the culture and see, is there going to be an inroad where these things will become normalized? And so back in 2010, when I was working on this, that was when the right to die movement was really starting to take off. It was still very early, and there was only a couple places in the world where you could access physician-assisted suicide, one place in particular in Switzerland called Dignitas. And the reason we were watching the development of this cultural conversation is because when we erode the taboos surrounding people's freedom of choice when it comes to deciding on the particulars of their death, our thinking was that it also allows for the opportunity to exercise more agency when it comes to what happens to you after you die. And because these protocols are all things that happen immediately following death, then the right to die and the right to live as long as you want are kind of the same. So we watch this very closely. And now from the vantage point of today, I think people are becoming more intentional about designing their end-of-life experiences. And in Canada, we have MAID, which I think is a wonderful thing. You might have seen this ad from Simon's, the Canadian retailer. And this is a story of this woman who decided to design her own end of life, and she had this amazing elaborate party with all this wonderful, with all her friends, and it's just like this incredible thing. So I think politically, morally, and legally, again, the right to die paves the way for the right to indefinite life, or living as long as you want. And over the coming decades, we're going to find an equilibrium with this type of service, and we're going to see a lot of design and innovation in end-of-life services, and I think as a result, we'll see the same in radical life extension services, so I'm hopeful for that. But the second lesson to take from that is you really need to watch the culture closely, because timing really is everything, and being too early is the same thing as being too late. So watch the culture, right, when you're designing with emerging technologies. Okay, second case study. After working in radical life extension for a couple of years, I thought, I want to work on something more tangible. I want to ship something to the market. I don't want to have to wait 100 years to see where this all goes. And because, as Ryan mentioned, I have a long-standing interest in brains, I thought, okay, the next thing I want to work on is neurotechnology. So luckily enough, I was living in Toronto at the time, and there was this really cool company called Interaxon. Let's see, there we go. So Interaxon built these amazing interactive experiences for brands using what at the time they were referring to as thought-controlled computing. So this is a video of the two founders, Ariel Garten, she's this woman here with the sunglasses, and Chris Imany, he's the chief technology officer. And you might recognize this man here. This is Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple. And Ariel is taking Steve through this experience where Steve puts on a thought-controlled computing headset, and he's able to control the lighting on the Parliament buildings, the CN Tower, and Niagara Falls from all the way across the country. So this was an installation we did for the Olympics in Vancouver. Or I should say they did. I wasn't part of the company at this point. So kind of an incredible demonstration of the power of this technology. And before we go much further, I just want to demystify this. This is not magic. This is a technology which some of you may have used before called electroencephalography, EEG. So EEG works by measuring electrical activity in the brain through sensors that are placed on your scalp. And those sensors detect these tiny electrical charges that are correlated with brain activity. And as it turns out, different mind states have different signature expressions on an EEG. So being focused looks like a particular thing. Being distracted looks like a particular thing. Being calm has a signature, as does being agitated. So in a medical setting, you might use an EEG for diagnostics. You would put an EEG headset on somebody and see where they have activity that is abnormal, and you might be able to diagnose focal seizure disorders or things like ADHD and stuff like that. You might also just use it for routine monitoring. So, if you have a heart monitor on, that's an electrocardiogram. This is an electroencephalogram. It's the same thing, same technology. And then the uses outside of a medical setting, well, we can use it as a control mechanism. So that's what Steve was doing in that chair. So Steve put on the headset, and what Ariel was telling him was, if you focus your attention, you will change the lighting from across the country on the CN Tower. And so when Steve was looking intensely at the CN Tower, he was trying to focus. And the way that works is that when you hook the EEG up to a computer program that has triggers, as soon as it sees a certain pattern in the EEG, it causes the program to do something, in this case, control lighting. So you can use it as a very simple control. And the last thing that you could do is use it as biofeedback. So you can present the output of the EEG to the person whose brain is being monitored. And you don't want to show them this raw EEG, but let's say you show them a flower, and you say, when you focus and relax, the flower will grow. And when you're distracted or agitated, the flower wilts. And so very quickly, what they learn is how to do that intentionally. And I think some of you were at the mindfulness, a wonderful mindfulness session we had this morning. This is really training wheels for mindfulness. That's what we were trying to develop. So, well, I'll get to that in just a second. So when I joined this company, on day one, Ariel said, we're not an interaction design company anymore. I was like, dang, that sounded like so much fun. I wanted to design some of those things. She said, we're pivoting to building products. And so this thing that she's wearing on her head was what would become our first product. It's called the Muse, and it's a meditation trainer using EEG. Now, this is what EEG headsets looked like at the time. Most of them were what was called research-grade headsets. They were built to be able to monitor the entire brain at once. They were not comfortable. They were difficult to put on. They often required the use of gel. So these sensors that are in this woman's hair, you would need to put conductive gel in her hair to get a good reading. And so that's not for everyday use, right? And most of them are also wired, so that there's a large battery pack on the back of this to power these sensors, and it would probably be stuck directly by a cord into a computer. Not very user-friendly. So when we set out to design the Muse, we wanted it to be as simple as possible. We wanted only as many sensors as we needed to get it to do what we wanted. So we took everything off except these 4 in the front of the head, which will be important in a second. We made it wireless. We Bluetooth enabled it. Easy to use, comfortable, unobtrusive. We really didn't want it to feel like technology. It should feel like a trusted companion, which is why we went with the name Muse. We wanted to foreground that sort of magical quality of the device, not its technology. We also wanted it to connect to the broader culture of meditation and sort of Eastern practices. And since we were launching this product into the Western world, we did some cultural research to ground the product in how meditation is seen in a Western context. Does anybody know what's going on in this photo? So this is really the moment when the Western consciousness turned towards the East in terms of its spiritual practices. Is when 1967 this was, when the Beatles visited India and stayed with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi on his ashram. So this is like the beginning of the yoga craze and all that. This is how it was imported into the West. So it's connected with pop culture. It's connected with these ideas of self-actualization. And so we wanted to draw on those, and we wanted to build a device that people would feel comfortable sitting in a park using. So that was our objective. And so as a general principle, we were just trying to find the warmth in an otherwise sort of cold and inviting technology. So this is just another important part of the story of emerging technology. So when we set about to design this headset, we tried a bunch of different form factors. So here's the 3 founders, and they're playing with, you could see a bunch of different form factors for this headset. And initially, there were futurists at this company other than myself. We were really attached to this idea that it would be sort of weird, asymmetrical, funky. We wanted it to be fashion forward. Ariel was a fashion designer, is a fashion designer. And so we were attached to this idea that it would be strange and unfamiliar. But we tried these prototypes on a bunch of people, and they all told us the most comfortable one was the one that you kind of see where it's just a headband. It's simple. It kind of resembles a headband, maybe a pair of sunglasses. It's intuitive. And so we had to set our hubris aside that we're going to create the future, and it's going to be weird, and go with something much simpler. So that was something we learned from testing. And the other thing I want to point out is that these prototypes are all non-functional. These were made with supplies that we got from the Currys down the street. We went to an art supply store, bought pipe cleaners, plasticine, blah, 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 and just cobbled these things together in an afternoon and ran a bunch of focus groups, put them on people's heads, and asked them what they thought. We didn't even tell them what the thing was for. We just told them, try these on. So just because you're working with sort of fancy technology doesn't mean you need to test with it. And then once we had a working prototype, we took it to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. This is footage from 2011 at our demo booth. And we had this experience. So this was designed by a Toronto artist. And it's sort of what I described with the flower. In this case, it was the more you concentrate, the birds fly and you create bubbles and so on. And we ran hundreds of people through this experience over the course of the week. And people loved it. It was, there was nothing else on the floor like it. But we discovered that after a couple days, we all started to compare notes. And we said, about 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 12 people that we try this on, we have a really hard time getting a reading off of them. And that was weird, because at the office, when we tried it on ourselves, when we tried it on our friends and family, it seemed to be fine. Now, when we try it on a larger sample size, we're finding issues. And when we compared notes, what we discovered was people have really different types of heads. And sometimes people have pointy foreheads. And sometimes people have hairlines that start quite low. And when you have these 4 sensors, then there were these rigid sensors that sit on the forehead, if you have a low hairline or if you have more of a vaulted forehead, let's call, those sensors wouldn't make good contact and we couldn't get the device to work. So, big problem. What we ended up having to do was take the prototype back and redesign it from the ground up. We had to retool, we had to find new suppliers, completely redesign the headband, and it actually ended up adding an entire year to our ship date for this product. So we had originally sort of promised it to our backers. By the way, we crowdfunded this. We did, at the time, had very little investment. We did a round of funding on Indiegogo to raise money for this prototype. So we had to go back to our backers, these people who had paid a couple $100 for early access, and say, it's going to take longer because we didn't know this was a problem. So the lesson there for me, the last thing I'll say is this is the Muse today. They've gone through several iterations. It now has onboard heart rate monitoring. It can do circulation monitoring. It has an expanded suite of offerings. They do sleep monitoring now. They've sold over 500,000 Muses, which I think is incredible. So they've come a long, long way since then. But they did it by testing relentlessly. We would have never hit on that final Muse S in day 1. And we had to learn. And when we thought we had tested enough, we realized we had nowhere near enough data, right? So you need to be testing all the time. Get your product and service in front of people. You're going to learn things you never thought were going to be important. Who knew? Who knew that people had such different size heads? OK, so very last case study. I want to talk briefly about the design space of artificial intelligence. And we have heard, we've heard a lot about this at XCamp. And I think it's just even as we're here this week, there's stuff that's happening in the news with artificial intelligence, like the launch of OpenAI's new GPT-4o, which is just mind-blowing. And I think we have no idea. We're just starting to unlock the value of this technology. And it's going to have enormous impacts, and we don't even really know how to measure the impact yet. I like to think about artificial intelligence as not like a new product or service type. It's almost like a new operating system for the digital world. We're kind of moving away from platforms towards agents. OK, so here's a little bit of evidence, early evidence for that. So these 2 graphs, the graph on the left is the average daily users at Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow, for those of you who don't know, is a place where you can go to get specific programming advice for programming issues. If you're a programmer, you can share knowledge about coding challenges. It's like kind of a community for web developers and programmers. OK? So what you see here is a graph of the average daily users. And the kind of wiggle is maybe, I don't know, weekends or something, who knows. But then it has this sharp drop-off right around the first quarter of 2022, which is when the GPT-3 hit the market. This was the first really successful large language model. And all of a sudden, people are not going to Stack Overflow as much, because instead of going to their peers to answer their questions about programming, they ask an artificial intelligence. That's the inference, OK? Then the second graph over here, so you might have heard there was a short period of time where Italy decided that they were going to ban the use of ChatGPT. The reason they did that is because they were worried about privacy issues. Europe has very strict privacy controls around data. They have a sort of legal framework called GDPR. And Italy, the lawmakers in Italy thought ChatGPT was too loose, fast and loose with people's data, and so they firewalled it. And so this is a graph showing the daily commits to GitHub, which is a place where programmers can store code, they document code, they can track changes, they can work on projects together. And this is specific to Italy. And so on the day of the ban, which is the red vertical line, you have this drop off in how many commits are being made to GitHub. In other words, how productive these coders are in Italy. And then it recovers, and this is from a paper that opines. They looked at the search terms through Italy, and after the days after the ban, there were a bunch of people in Italy looking for VPNs, which are they're ways to get around, to tell a network that you're actually in a different country so you can access this website. So it took a couple of days for them all to get the VPNs up and running, but they found a route around, and then they became even more productive, right? So this, I'm just trying to make the case that there's stuff happening with AI right now in terms of its impact to productivity and impact to just like business as usual, which we're only really just starting to measure effectively. Okay, so why these paper clips? A lot of people are really worried about AI, and I think for good reason. You know, this is, as I said, it's a new operating system for the digital world, and that's not something to take lightly. And AI researchers for decades have been thinking about, okay, well, what happens when we have machine intelligence that exceeds all human intelligence? And one of the kind of things that they think about a lot is alignment. How do we align artificial intelligence with human values? How do we make sure that we're all getting along and we're not heading off in different directions? And so one of the thought experiments in this space of alignment is, imagine you have a well-meaning artificial intelligence, just wants to please humans, and you have a human operator who really needs a lot of paper clips. And so the human operator says to the AI, can you just make paper clips for me? Make as many paper clips as you can. I'm running a conference and I have all these booklets and I just need a lot of paper clips. And the AI goes, okay, I can make you paper clips. And then it just sets about turning the entire universe into paper clips. It just uses every available means to convert all matter into paper clips because it took the instruction literally. It didn't understand that just because this person operating the AI wants paper clips, you shouldn't turn the entire universe into paper clips. So that's an alignment, an illustration of the alignment problem. And again, I think that these are interesting thought experiments, but my pushback is, I think that the current era of digital platforms is not well aligned with human values either. So this is well captured by writers and thinkers like Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote a book called Surveillance Capitalism, about how the giant platforms just kind of suck up all of our data without our consent and then use it to target us with ads and erode our privacy and our autonomy. Tristan Harris, there's a great documentary which some of you may have seen called The Social Dilemma, where he outlines some of these concerns as well. And so, I think that we're already in a place where our digital world is not well aligned with human values. And I think that goes doubly for social media. This is probably something that you all are very familiar with. Social media has been good in a lot of ways, but it also has had some profoundly negative effects. It has led to greater political polarization. It has reduced our social cohesion, which is a weird thing to say about a technology that was intended to do the opposite. There's a good lesson there. And it also seems to be, the rise of social media seems to be the smoking gun that's linked to the rise of incidences of mental health issues and suicide, particularly in young people. So if you look at the graph of the adoption of social media right around 2008 when it goes mobile, I guess that's around the time, there is an uptick in these issues. And that's documented in the work of a social scientist named Jonathan Haidt. But we're starting to come to this point where there's legal, moral, and political pushback against this sort of these systems. So my question is, how can we use artificial intelligence, how can we use agents to fix some of the excesses of this platform digital economy that we have, this runaway platform digital economy? And that's some of the work that we're trying to do with at Lotic.ai. We do believe that there's a misalignment in values, in human values in the digital world, and we're trying to fix that using artificial intelligence. So the framework that we use for that is, this is the way we think about it. The problem is actually not that the big platforms know too much about us. That seems strange, right? Because it seems like they know a lot. is that they know so little about us that they barely know us at all. Okay, what do I mean by that? There's this wonderful work done by a personality psychologist named Dan P. McAdams, and he has this great paper called What Does It Mean to Know a Person? And he sorts knowledge into 3 categories. There's this baseline. This is the sort of thing you could learn about a person from observing them across the room at a party for 5 minutes. Their traits, their behavioral patterns, emotional tendencies, thinking styles. You can tell, is that person gregarious? Like, are they friendly? Are they standoffish? It becomes apparent very quickly. And then once you get to know somebody a bit more, well, then you learn the realm of what's called their personal concerns. These are their goals, their values, motivations, the roles they play in their social world, their coping strategies, interpersonal strategies. This is when you really start to get to know somebody. And then finally, your nearest and dearest, well, what do you know about them, the people who are closest to you? You know their life story. You know their defining experiences. You know their personal ideology. And this is the deepest knowledge you can have. These things are things that platforms don't understand about us at all. They really understand these traits, and especially they understand the things about how we operate in a sort of degraded way when we're mindlessly scrolling and clicking and all that. Like, that's not our higher self, right? So they just don't understand these things. But as it turns out, a lot of people don't understand these things about themselves either. And I think that's because we live in a world of distraction, where we're not able to kind of stick our heads up and ask these questions of ourselves. So what we're doing at Lotic is trying to build artificial intelligence that helps people to unearth that higher sense of themselves by asking you questions. And instead of an AI being trained on data in the world, like the LLMs trained on all this text and all that kind of stuff, these are LLMs that are trained on you and what you know about yourself and what you say and what you tell it. So it uses a kind of a combination of behavioral science and artificial intelligence to unearth these stories about yourself, right? So that's kind of the inversion that we're trying to create with Lotic, is to help people create self-awareness that they can then use to be better consumers of digital products and just pilot their lives more effectively. Okay, so I know I'm out of time here. I'll just, in closing, I just want to say, getting people to not just talk to AI, but have AI talk to them and ask them deeply personal questions, that's a huge, there's a barrier there. People are kind of afraid of that. And so just like some of these other examples I gave, we're trying to normalize it in creative ways. And so this last video is the CEO of Lotic, Bill, talking about an experience we did at South by Southwest, where people could get into this little sound-isolated booth, tell a story to our AI, and the AI would produce art that was based on the sentiment in that story. So if it was a sad story, it would use different colors and different brushstrokes and stuff. So.
Hi, I'm William Welser. Welcome to our booth here at South by Southwest. I believe that everyone has a voice, and thus everyone has a story. We have an installation of our Wisdom Pod.
The idea of answering questions that then generate art is really interesting to me, because that's what artists do.
And brought up some things I had kind of forgotten.
That was really beautiful. This one's name is Austin.
We're going to make it an experience that is exciting and visual, and afterwards you get personalized art. It's exciting for us.
So the final lesson I wanted to impart here is that when you're working with emerging technologies in particular, you're not building for this world, you're building for the next one. So I just wanted to kind of drive home that we're not trying to prop up the platforms. If you're working, especially if you're working in AI, you're just working in the world to come. And we just don't know what that value is going to be yet, but it's going to be enormous. Just to close, I want to reiterate, I think, the importance of the role of UX in the adoption of these types of technologies. And I do think there is a moral calling here, too. I think these strong emotions that people have, the fear that these technologies sometimes bring about, can keep people from accessing the value that new technologies can bring to their lives. So in the cases that I described, that could mean maybe they have fewer healthy years, because the fear kept them from trying something. Or they passed on the opportunity to have a calmer and more focused mind. Or they passed on the opportunity to better understand themselves and get unstuck and have a life that has more purpose and more self-assuredness. So I think there is a moral calling for user experience designers to help people to wrap their heads around some of these new technologies. So in closing, go off-road mapping, watch the culture very closely for change. Find the warmth in these technologies because they need them really badly. Test as much as you can, as often as you can, and build for the next world. Thanks very much.